very strange circumstance when we're competing with St. Patrick's Day tonight. Different crowd, perhaps.
Same thing.
Same crowd. Ball barely made it. It's hard pressed.
Just snuck in here.
Well, nice to see you. Thank you for coming. It's death in the realms of existence for us is St. Patrick's Day.
Nice green folder.
This is Oliver's bird study. That's why. Okay. You ready?
Sashi Bhagi Jishin Metok Tram Nriravling Shin Yundevyam Padi Sangye Shindu Mite Vivargi Drogun Namda Shinla Chiparsho Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Ninyatayami Sangye Jidam Zogi Jognanga Janchu Vardu Dakni Gyapsuchi Daki Chinyangi Pesananki Drola Venchir Sangye Driparsho Sangye Chidam Zogi Jabnam La Janchu Vardu Dakni Gyapsuchi Dagi Chinyangi Pesanangi Drola Venchir Sangye Driparsho Sangye Chidam Zogi Jabnam La Janchu Vardu Dakni Gyapsuchi Daki Chinyangi Pesanangi Drola Venchir Sangye Driparsho.
Please sit comfortably with your spine straight. Awareness focused internally. We'll take a moment to simply shift gears and bring the mind to a more neutral place by watching our breath. Beginning with an exhalation, watch the rounds, count 14 rounds. be aware of the beings around you. There are those who can see and those who cannot. Do a brief analytical meditation. Think of all the beings that may be in this room that you can't perceive with your eyes. Insects, small creatures, countless beings that you can deduce are present physically. Think about beings that you're not so readily seen or known or acknowledged. Beings of other realms who are here. Try to be aware of them also. Just as the many insects and other creatures in this room are not visible to your eyes, but they're here. Just take a few moments and try to gain a sense of the fact that there are many beings that can't see that we're here on many levels. You can analyze for a moment the empty nature of the beings you can see in this room. Lack of self-existent identity. What are they really? Try to withdraw your projections and concepts from it. And still perceive them. You can catch your mind labeling and naming and just stop and remind yourself there is something there without attaching an identity. Try to feel the existence of beings without naming them. Watch what naturally arises in your mind as a label for the beings around you. What asserts itself? Holy? Pure? Try to let go of those labels and names again. Remove them. Try to simply sense the beings with you. And when you're ready, simply allow your mind to form a name and an idea. See what comes. And then again, dissolve the name and the label and just be aware of the being there without identity or concept. And now, bring the thought forth of holy being. You can see if it's hard for your mind, if your mind struggles and resists. Is it natural? Is it an easy reflex? Now again, turn your awareness to all the beings in the room you cannot see. On many levels, from the very small insects to the unseen beings of other realms. And use your mind to project and label holy beings for all of them. See what that feels like. Okay, homage to all holy beings. Thank you for coming. So tonight we're talking about realms of existence and death. Less death, more realms of existence. Next time, more death. Which reminds me, before I forget, next week I'm not here. I'm away for work next week, so no class next week. We'll resume the following week. Okay. So, the whole notion and idea of the realms of existence is wrapped up with the nature of perception, the nature of reality. Right? So hopefully at this point we've all had a fairly thorough, rigorous, or consistent exposure to ideas about the nature of perception, ideas about how things exist and how things don't exist, and how perception creates reality. Right? So when we did this course, course 8, and it's 11 classes, it covered various things. It covered the description of the bardo, or the intermediate state, which is the state between when you die and you take rebirth. It covered the different realms you can go to after you die. It covered how to do a death meditation. And in some respects, this is some of the hardest material for Western Buddhists, because we grow up in a culture where we don't believe in past lives and future lives. I mean, we have the idea of heaven, perhaps, or something like that, more broadly in our culture. But the notion that we'll have another life, and another life, and another life, not just be in heaven and hell forever, is not really ingrained within our culture. You know, whereas in Tibetan culture and other Eastern cultures, they're raised and indoctrinated with the idea that you had past lives and future lives, right? So when we talk about these things, it's difficult. It's difficult to I don't know. It's difficult to be comfortable with it, or it's difficult to just let it in sometimes. You know, everything that we see in newspapers and magazines and television, and pretty much everything in our almost everything in our culture and society is geared towards, you know, live life now. This is your life. This is your life. This is it. You know, live with gusto. One life to live. You know, do it all now before you die, because once you die, it's done, right? I mean, who knows where you'll be, or whether you'll be at all, or whether you'll be in heaven or you'll be in hell forever. But it's got nothing to do with this. I mean, it doesn't approximate this even remotely. You know, and you're certainly not going to just pick up where you left off. You're either going to burn forever, or you're going to be in paradise forever, right? I mean, in a Christian sense. So, very different paradigm for thinking about other realms that exist, and what life is like after this life. So, hello, Bruce. Hello, hello. So we talked about the proof of past and future lives, and the point is not so much in this material to go into that and to cover that. Just briefly to say that, you know, from a Western concept, the mind and body are closely linked and almost synonymous. The brain, when we die, the physical body dies, the brain stops, and we're considered to be dead, right? And that's kind of as far as our society and our culture takes it. So the physical mechanism is done, you know, it's not moving, and therefore it's presumed that everything else associated with this stuff is done as well. So from a scientific perspective, or a normal cultural perspective, when the meat is finished, then you're finished, right? And maybe there's something that floats off into the spirit world, and maybe there isn't, right? Something like that, right? So, if we don't accept the notion of past and future lives, then there's not much point talking about other realms, right? I mean, if we have this paradigm that, you know, after you die, you're done, I mean, you're in heaven or hell forever, or you're not going anywhere, then it wouldn't make sense to have other realms, right? Just, what's the point? Right? It's like every being in every realm, like, you know, dogs die and dogs are done, you know, spirits die and spirits are done, and they go to heaven and they go to hell. So it's implicit, and we have to, in some way, either put aside whatever cultural indoctrination we have, or whatever deep belief system we were raised with that says there is nothing after you die, or there's only heaven or hell after you die, if we're going to talk about realms of existence, right? So, I mean, just even from a scientific perspective, one could say, look, even if one just believes that we're a ball of chemicals from cosmic gases that somehow took 1 billion years to, you know, to evolve into a sentient organism capable of what we're doing, that belief has within it the notion that it will happen again. If one believes in infinite time, if one believes that things have always existed and will always exist, which is not a given, but if one believes that in the scheme of infinite time, what's a billion years, right? So what if it takes you a billion years to, to form every time you're going to be sentient? It doesn't matter in infinite time, right? You'll exist over and over and over again infinitely, even if it's a billion years apart, right? So, I mean, Buddhism doesn't say that. I'm simply making the point from a rational perspective that even if all we believe in is the scientific story, right, of we're a lot of cosmic gases which have congealed into sentient beings over a long period of time, okay, it'll happen again, and again, and again, and again, ad infinitum. So, even from that perspective, there are future lives, and there will be future lives, right? Which is not the Buddhist story. The Buddhist story is different. I'm simply trying to make a case for the fact that there are numerous bases to be open to the fact that there are other realms that we will experience after we die. Right? So, if that's the case, then where might we end up, and what might it be like? Right? It's not going to just be New York City every time, right? Especially if it's a billion years of pop, or even. Okay, never mind. I'll let go of that.
Will it be St. Paddy's Day? Sorry.
Will there be a St. Paddy's Day? Right?
Will there
always
be?
Will there be a St. Paddy's, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, there's the. I mean, it's. Yeah. Anyway, never mind. So. I don't feel the need much to go into the whole emptiness thing. I think everyone here is fairly comfortable with it. Would you agree? Yeah? Yeah. So
I think it's healthy to hear.
it's a healthy thing to do. All right.
To hear, please.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So let's take this table. I mean, if the dog walks in here, this is a place for the dog to have a pee, It's not a place for it to put something down and write on it, right? So this isn't a table for a dog. It's a table for me. Everything is like that. There is no objective reality. Nothing has an identity of its own, right? Nothing has a nature of its own from its own side. Nothing has an identity of its own from its own side. Nothing exists by definition from its own side, right? So I'm not John from my own side. I'm not a human being from my own side. I'm a human being based upon me or others thinking of me that way and conceiving of me that way and relating to me that way, right? So everything is like that, right? There is no Johnness emanating from me. There is no humanness emanating from me. There is no tableness emanating from this, right? So it's true of every object in existence, the floor, the walls, everyone and everything, right? So if that's the case, then what, right? I mean, what does that mean for the future, right? I recognize this room as a Dharma center because of the way my mind is functioning. When we did our little meditation, perhaps you observed that your mind wants to think of things a certain way. If you can stop your mind, if you can still the projections that you're naturally putting forth, if you can withdraw those and still that for a moment and watch the mind from a neutral place, and then watch the mind then assert a label and assert a term and assert an idea onto someone or something, it becomes very obvious that I'm naming it that, right? I'm calling it that and I'm relating to it as such, right? And you can also see that it's easy or hard for the mind to say that's a good person or a bad person or a holy person or an ordinary person, right? It's very difficult for the mind to say, I'm going to naturally think of him as holy. My mind wants to think of him as human, right? So these thoughts that arise in the mind, these assertions of the mind, they are our perception and they are our reality, right? So why does the thought, he's human, come up in my mind? Where does it come from and why does it arise? Why might it be easy for me to think he's holy one day, and why might it be hard for me to think he's holy another day? And why might it be hard for me to think he's a good person one day versus a bad person another day? I don't have conscious control of those thoughts. I don't determine the thoughts that are popping up into my head. They're just there. They just appear. They arise, right? So this is a stream of karma ripening, right? Is the karmic seeds ripen, or the impulses arise, and certain thoughts arise, and certain feelings arise, and certain perceptions result, right? And that's our reality, right? So, that's past karma, right? The past karma that I've collected is what is manifesting in my mind as thoughts and as perception. The past karma that I collected asserts itself to think, I'm bored, and then the thought is there. Or the past karma asserts itself to think, wow, that's really profound, and then the thought is there, and the experience is there, and the reality is there. Right? And that's true of everything, right? Not just at the subjective experiential level, but at the level of reality, at the level of that's a dog, or that's a table, or I'm a human, or I'm a bug, whatever the case might be. The simple fact that I look down and I see shapes and colors as an arm and a hand and fingers is a function of how my mind is perceiving, right? And when my mind shifts and when my mind perceives in a way to say those colors and shapes are, whatever, an antenna or a paw or whatever it might be, then that's my reality, that's my valid perception, right? So it's a big leap to do that personally, to think, well, if I could look down and see this as a cat's paw or something. That's a big leap to take, because I look down and I only see a hand, and I've always only seen a hand, right? But you have the philosophical underpinnings, you have the principle of emptiness and how it works and the nature of projection. And I think everyone understands it, and I think, at least from a philosophical, intellectual perspective, that it's clear. Is that, yes? So then it becomes a much harder transition to go from that intellectual, philosophical understanding to application in one's daily life, right? So I personally find it to be very helpful to try to not project terms and identities and names onto people and things, because it makes it more akin to a blank screen, which I can then see the potential of, Does that make sense? In a way, it's like reverting back to a neutral canvas, if you will, if you're going to make a picture, right? The mind is naturally saying, that's a wall, that's a Tonka, that's Hector, Hector's 6 feet in front of the wall, there's this spatial separation between the two, but that's all mental creation, right? And to the extent that I can train myself to disengage from that process of obsessive I almost want to call it mindless projection, but it's uncontrolled projection. It's kind of like continuous uncontrolled projection, right? To the extent that I can calm my mind and disengage my mind and have awareness such that I can say, I'm not going to just spew whatever comes up from my mind onto everything around me. I'm going to actually have some discipline with my mind, and I'm going to train my mind, and I'm going to be aware of what thoughts are arising and feelings are arising and names and terms and concepts are arising, which I'm labeling my world with and experiencing as my world, right? I just find that to be very useful, because to me there has to be some kind of step between the intellectual, philosophical understanding of emptiness and projection and the rest, to where we engage, to where we're actually trying to live that way and do it, and to actually practice it in daily life. On the cushion is great, but most of our time is off the cushion, right? And so for me, I find it to be very helpful to think in terms of, I could think of her as a holy being, I could think of her as an angel, I could think of her as a suffering being, and my mind is going to assert some idea, some identity, right? And it could be any one of 100. Right?
So John, do you have an internal kind of dialogue going, or how do you experience these thoughts or work with these thoughts? Because my experience is that I often have the projection before I realize that I'm projecting.
Well, yeah.
Then I realize I'm projecting.
Yeah, yeah. But isn't that the nature of karma, right? And it becomes very tricky and very slippery in some respects. And I know Bruce is gonna like jump all over this.
Go on, Bruce.
No.
And I haven't had dessert either, so it's gonna be ugly.
Shouldn't goad you, right?
Please.
So, this is a very interesting point, right? Thoughts assert themselves, right? And the thought to do something with those thoughts asserts itself. Both are popping up in the mind, in principle, outside of our control, right? So if the thought arises, oh, I hate that, they're so stupid, right? And then I say, oh shoot, I just did that and I didn't even have any control of it, now it's out, now I need to withdraw it or something, right? And it's like, that follow-on is also arising of its own accord, which is also karmic ripening. So you see, it becomes a very tricky business in some respects. And so much of karma is intention and motivation and aspiration, because it collects certain karmic seeds which will ripen into results, right? Like wanting to be a good person, thinking the thought, I don't want to hurt anyone, bodhisattva motivation. So many aspirational intentions collect karmic seeds which ripen into thoughts which naturally pop up, which may be thoughts, I'm not saying they are, but which may be thoughts like, oh, I wish I just didn't say that to that person, let me try to take it back. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's an active process. You know, training the mind is an active process. Doing it with wisdom involves understanding that I'm just projecting my internal landscape continuously onto everything around me. And it's not about anything around me, it's just about my internal landscape. You know, call it karma or impulses or habituation, or you can call it whatever you want, right? I mean, from a Buddhist perspective, we'll call it most subtle impulses, karmic seeds, and you know, and past deeds, right? And so that is the internal landscape that we carry with us, our subtle mind stream, our art, our energetic impulses, and you can talk about it in a lot of different ways, right? But those are the things which arise and manifest as our mind, our perception, our reality, right? So I don't get too far afield. So that said, why do we perceive ourselves as human beings or dogs or spirits or hell realm beings or angels or whatever the case might be? It's the exact same thing we're talking about. You know, certain thoughts arise, certain perceptions arise, and they're real. You know, I mean, if I'm sitting there going like, I feel so happy right now, and I don't know why, it just popped up, right? That's real, right? And it's equally real if the thought or the feeling pops up, everything's glowing and looks like, you know, like some other realm. If that thought pops up and that feeling pops up, it's equally real, you know. Or if the thought and the perception arises in the mind of, wow, there are other beings that I can see that I couldn't see before, you know, that's equally valid, equally real, you know. So, and that cuts both ways. That goes both ways. You know, say, wow, I can see and experience suffering beings that I couldn't see before and couldn't perceive before. And I see them over there. I don't see myself as that kind of being, but it's still a valid perception. You know, what's the difference between having a valid perception of a dog over there and a dog over here? One is I'm projecting it over there, and one is I'm projecting it right here. That's about the only difference. I mean, they're both, you know, if I'm projecting a dog, I can be projecting it on that, or on that, or on this, right? It's all the same basis, right? It's a basis of projection, you know? And the notion that there is another realm over there, and I'm going to take a rebirth over there, and somehow there's like a closet full of other bodies waiting for me to pop into one of them over there, is a misconception, is a misunderstanding of the nature of realms and rebirth, right? realms and rebirth are all about shifting perceptions, shifting mental states within ourselves. If my mental state shifts, I can have a momentary perception of another realm, or I can have a very long-term perception of another realm. Like maybe I have a great sublime meditation, and maybe I have 15 seconds of some like really like amazing experience, right? Or I'm like, oh, this is really cool. This is like not an ordinary world, an ordinary world, or whatever, right? Okay, but that's simply a shift of perception that lasted 15 seconds. If that perception lasts 50 years, if that shift in perception lasts 50 years, I'm living there, right? It wasn't just a momentary meditative experience. It becomes, my life. For example, yeah.
I always toggle in my mind with this beautiful concept.
Yeah.
And the Buddhist assertion that if you see a leaf crossing the street and you think it's a squirrel and you put your brakes on, for that moment that you perceived it to be a squirrel, it's misconception, even though you had a projection of it being a squirrel.
Right.
And if you'd run past the leaf and didn't ever stop to think it was a leaf, you might live with it as a squirrel in your head and the karma's associated with it, but it still wasn't a squirrel.
Yeah.
How do you bring those two together in one way?
Yeah, so it's the idea of valid perception, prominent and valid perception, right? What's a valid perception and what's not a valid perception, right?
Or a correct valid perception. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm not going to give you a scriptural answer because I'm not a scriptural authority, but I'll just reason it out with you, right? So, to me, perception is reality, right? So, I ask you, what is the difference between seeing a leaf on the road that you think is a squirrel for 2 seconds before you realize it's not? What's the difference between that, say, and having the perception that, Rachel hates you and stabs you in the back because of something that she did for 5 minutes, and then realizing that there's new information and new data, and she doesn't really hate you and she didn't really stab you in the back, and she actually likes you and you got it wrong. What's the difference between those?
Yeah, there is.
There's no difference. Both are valid perceptions, right?
But the perceptive facts have changed.
So, at what point in time is it a valid perception?
Well, it's valid, it's both the leaf and the squirrel.
Yeah. So for that moment, it's a valid perception. So either leaf or Rachel, either way, for the period of time, for the information available, the data taken in and processed by the mind and conceptualized and projected as the nasty piece of work if you stab me in the back, or the leaf.
Thanks, Rachel.
Right? For that period of time, that is a valid perception.
For sure.
And then the perception shifts and the perception changes and it's a different valid perception. Right? Is Rachel a nasty person or not? Is that leaf a leaf or a squirrel? I'll share something. I remember doing a Leron one time. It was like a 3-week retreat or so. I don't remember, 3 or 4 weeks. And I just had my back to the window. I'm sitting there meditating, and I'm just meditating in this summertime, this window, and there's spiders and flies and all this stuff, right? And so, I'd sit there meditating, and I remember in one meditation session, I heard all this like furious buzzing, like bzzz, and I'm like, and there's spiders all over the place. I'm going, and the spiders webs in the corner, and I'm going like, all right, there's a fly caught in the web, and it's buzzing furiously to get out of the web. And I'm sitting here for like, an hour in my session, right? Going like, and for part of the time, not all the time, going like, should I save the fly and starve the spider? Or should I not do anything and let the spider eat and the fly die? Right? And so I'm going and I'm going. And it's like an hour of buzzing. And finally, like after an hour, I get up and I go look and I go investigate. There's no spider, there's no fly. Because I'm thinking to myself in meditation, let me just try and empty this meditation. I don't remember what I was doing. Let me try and empty this meditation. Let me like see it differently. Let me do a different, practice on this, right? And so I'm like sitting there and I come to the end of the session, an hour or two, whatever it is. And I get up and I turn around and I was like, there's no spider, there's no. And I look in the frame of the windowsill And there's a little mud channel that was made by a mud wasp that was building a little nest, a little cell, right? And so I'm going to myself, huh, that's interesting. Was it a spider and a fly?
Yes, it was in your mind, right?
Well, I don't know. You see, was there an objective reality?
The perceptive reality, the facts of the perceptive reality were there.
So you planted karma of mind in relation to wanting to do something or not doing something, as you thought of it as a fly. And then when that reality disappeared,
Your perceptions bring it into being for you
mhm,
at any given moment in time, which is the point I was getting to when we're talking about realms of existence. Whether one has an experience of another realm for 5 seconds or 500 years, as long as that perception obtains, that is your valid reality. Okay? So it's possible to have a perceptual shift which results in a glimpse of another realm, or a glimpse of another type of being, or a glimpse of yourself as another type of being, right? Or it's possible to have a karma ripen where that lasts for a long period of time, which we call typically death and rebirth, and taking birth in another realm. There isn't another realm that you float off to, you know. There isn't a store of spare bodies, you know. It's not like every realm has like a warehouse of spare bodies waiting for somebody to pop into them, you know. It's not like that. There's not just some inventory of bodies that we're shuffling between from life to life, you know. It doesn't work that way. So, you know, there is a perception, yeah.
Why are we willing, on the one hand, to disparage this notion of an inventory of realities waiting to be inhabited?
Okay, you could have that reality, Bruce. I give you, okay?
Wait a minute, I'm just putting that.
Go ahead.
Wait.
On the other hand, we are all too accepting of the notion that we have this thing we're calling perceptual shift. We've got an inventory now of perceptual shifts without quite examining what's the repository of these perceptual shifts. Do they just exist in perceptual shift land? And how is it that we're willing to accept the durability, the identity, the integrity of something that we're living a perceptual shift?
Yeah.
That's okay, but an inventory of bodies, well, that's ridiculous. Why should that be?
Well, so you know, you're going back to the mind-only school, talking about the kunshi and the storehouse consciousness for your karmic seeds and all that. Back to that old debate, right? Which is, if we're going to say that we have perceptions which arise from your karmic seeds, right? Where are the karmic seeds? Where are the karmic seeds stored, right? It's the karma course, Bruce, course 5.
So everything is stored in course 5, that's what you're saying?
of course.
Core storage course.
Okay. So whatever we use, whatever blunt instrument we use
Yeah.
to denude
Yeah.
a particular set of reference
Yeah.
of inherent reality,
Yeah.
we wind up with the embarrassing problem of legacy of that.
Well, so I wouldn't use that language, obviously, of inherent reality and such. So if we talk about where do perceptions come from, I mean, I think that's what you're saying, right? Where do the perceptions come from, and why do we perceive reality shifting from moment to moment to moment? Right now, my hands are moving. It's perceiving reality shifting, right? I mean, I'm not static. Everything's not a frozen statue here.
And it's not random. It doesn't appear to be random. There
Yeah.
appears to be some
Right.
order and
Predictability and
and
consistency.
causality and consistency.
So, given that things are changing moment to moment, right? Perceptions are shifting moment to moment. Yeah. Where are those perceptual shifts coming from? Why is the mind fluctuating? Why is the mind moving? That's right. And
why
perceiving.
And why is the mind? Period. Full stop.
Yeah. What and why? What is the mind and why is the mind? Right. So, from a Buddhist perspective, your mind is the collection of your karmic impulses, right? As are you. Now see, I mean, you can unfold that a little bit. So, if we say that, let me rewind and unfold into both. So, if we say that the tail end of every thought, word, and deed has a residual energy, which is your karmic seed, which you collect. It's language and terminology, right? So it's easy to talk about physical seeds, okay? But let's talk about it from the perspective of energetic impulses, okay? Because it's analogous but more subtle. So, and we probably should do the class at some point too, but but let's do this. What the hell?
Hell realm.
We'll get to the hell realm. That's right.
Implicit hell realm.
That's right. So I think a thought, energy is used and there's a residual energy, right? The residual energy at the tail end of that thought stays with me. It is the karmic seed. The collection of those karmic seeds, the collection of those residual energies are my mind stream. And by extension, are my perceptions, and by extension, are me.
What causes the seeds to collect? Or is it just the perception of a collection that
When you say
separates the self
collect,
from? Well, you just said a collection of karmic
why
seeds.
are they collected as me,
Right.
for example? So it's a very beautiful question. It's a very holy, beautiful question. Why do I perceive me as right here? Why do I perceive this little orb as me? Master Shanti Deva says in the guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, why do you think you stop at the edge of your skin? Why do you see yourself that way? Why do you think of yourself that way? So there is a particular perceptual predisposition we have to define ourselves this way because of how our mind is functioning right now.
Is it a matter of convenience, almost in a certain point?
Perhaps it's functional convenience. Couldn't say. I mean, it certainly works to some degree, but it's messed up in other ways, right?
Right.
I mean, isn't that what Master Shanti Deva and so many saints are saying? Stop defining yourself as this little bag of skin. Define yourself as everyone and everything. You know, and treat them well as a result. You know. Sorry, what were you saying?
No, he said it's because of habit, basically.
Well,
Like some.
yeah. I mean, imprints, right? Conditioning, habituation, karma. So, I mean, there's very broad, vast implication to that. What if I thought of everyone as me? What if I treated everyone as me? You know, what would the world be like? Better, I would imagine, right? So it's very beautiful, right? It's very holy. Where we are right now, where we're functioning right now, is that we are seeing and defining ourselves in this particular way. I'm a human being, and I'm right here in this bag of skin, and this is who I am, and I'm not you, and I'm not you, and I'm not you, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. Very holy study of Chi Chedrock. How do I define what I am and what I'm not? How do I define what's this and what's that? And studying that leads to the perception of emptiness. So you're on the right track. Okay. So,
that's a good question.
Yeah, of course.
I just want to be clear on what you said. You mentioned there not being a closet full of bodies. Did you just mean on the physical realm, but maybe energetically that's possible?
Yeah, I would
different
think,
realms?
yeah. So if we, again, we take it to a different level of language, right? A different approach. You could think, well, okay, there's not a. When I say a closet full of dog bodies or hell being bodies or whatever, from their own side, it's like when you go into your clothes closet and you look and you say, oh, there's 10 shirts here, just waiting for me. It's like that's what I'm talking about, right? So, is it the case that there are lots of collections of karmic seeds and impulses and imprints? Absolutely. That's what we call different mind streams, different beings, right? But can we, perceive, as we did in the meditation at the beginning of the class, can we perceive those beings without that projected identity and name?
Which projected identity?
Whichever one. Right?
Can you ask that question again? Can we perceive the beings?
Oh, you missed the meditation. We did a meditation at the beginning of class where we were
Okay.
practicing perceiving the beings in the room without projecting their identity and their name and their term and their what they are, who they are.
Okay.
So that's what I was referring to. So, when we die, our body dies, our brain dies, and what is left are the subtle energetic impulses. Subtle, what in Buddhism we call the subtle mind stream, right? And so our most subtle habituation, our most subtle impulses, all of our most subtle energetic seeds, if you will, are us and continue as us, right? And have a different perception. So from a Buddhist perspective, the mind is separate from the body and the brain. Yes, they're related and connected. But when the hunk of meat dies, including the brain, when it stops functioning, the mind does not. Okay? The mind is continuously sentient, aware, and perceiving. So for my mind to have the perception of this body doesn't move anymore, my mind just keeps shifting and perceiving other things, right? It doesn't stop perceiving, it doesn't stop shifting, it doesn't stop, its awareness doesn't cease. So that's all it takes to perceive my death, is for my awareness to shift in a certain way. It's no different than my perception shifting when I walk out that door. It takes about the same amount of time. It's the exact same process. My perception shifts and I walk out the door. My perception shifts and I don't move. They're the exact same process, the exact same degree of difficulty and speed at which it could arise and occur.
They say death is more painful.
Than walking through the door.
Yeah.
yeah. Absolutely, right? And we're going to talk about it a little later. I hope we get to it. As to why that is, right? I mean, one of the reasons why death is so painful. And I'm going to wait because I don't want to jump too far out of sequence. So why are perceptions shifting all the time? Why are perceptions ripening all the time? Every moment, karmic seeds are ripening and being consumed. They're being used up, right, and finishing. And so I can have a karma ripen, which results in me seeing myself as, being in a different realm, which could last for 5 years or 500 years or 5 million years, right? But sooner or later, those karmas are used up, right? And I'm left with whatever else I got in my karmic pocket, to speak metaphorically, right? And so that's why we take rebirth again and again and again until we reach enlightenment, because we haven't learned how to perpetuate existence in a good, ultimately good realm. Enlightenment is learning how to stay in that realm of total amazingness forever, right? You don't have karmas which fluctuate into the perception of rebirth, right? You don't have perceptual fluctuations of death and rebirth, right? I mean, that's the difference between being an enlightened being and being a being in cyclic existence, and one of the suffering realms of existence. If you're a being in a suffering realm of existence, you have karmic ripenings, you have perceptual shifts of this body's life is coming to an end, and now another one's starting. And I used to be a human, and now I'm a burning hell being, or I'm a cat, or I'm a angelic being for 1 million years, or whatever, right? And then that comes to an end, and then it shifts to the next thing. So enlightenment is attaining the state where your perceptual shifts don't include death and rebirth in that way, right? It's not some place where you go on the other side of the galaxy where you just get to hang out, in that locus forever. It's simply changing the nature of your perception such that you never have that kind of perceptual shift ever again. Right?
That's a hell of a sales pitch.
Maybe. So,
I'm buying.
I'm buying what you're selling. Okay. So to be in this realm is quite expensive karmically, I mean, that we're going to talk about in different realms, but
But in a sense, to use another metaphor, doesn't it take money to make money? In other words,
absolutely.
You can't achieve the higher realms from a lower existence.
Absolutely.
You have to roll the dice, burn the karma to be in this realm, trying to get to a higher realm.
And we are rolling the dice.
Rolling the dice.
I don't like this metaphor.
Can we switch to another metaphor, please?
Easy button.
If the dice you have is presently rolling.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's exactly right. The different realms of existence, the lower realms of existence, very, very, very difficult to collect karma to make spiritual progress.
Right.
Because if you're in a hell realm and you're burning, I mean, think about like last time you had a toothache. You can't think of anything except my tooth hurts, right? And it's magnified by 1,000,000, right? So if you're in a heavy suffering realm, the mind almost can't function in any other capacity except to experience pain. And when one is experiencing pain, that's just all you can do. You can't think, let me go help someone, let me go do a virtue. You're just like, I'm just in pain, 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 pain. It's the only thing going on. Pain, 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 pain. There's no virtue, it's just going pain, 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 right? Or screaming endlessly, or whatever the case may be, right? No virtue in it. And then similarly, if you're really well off, like, the people who like are really successful and really rich and really beautiful, they're in demand. They got stuff to do. I mean, they got dinners to go to and restaurants to go to and events to attend and lots of people who want to talk to them and be with them and lots of fun stuff that they could be off traveling and swimming and seeing the world. There's no time. There's like not much interest or not much time available to do virtue. Essentially, you're having so much fun, you're not really interested in doing virtue. And I mean, especially as you go to higher and higher realms, and you go into these high pleasure realms, it's like everything is just great all the time. I mean, just not much else to think about except, wow, this is great. I mean, think about our own lives. Like, when everything's great, how far out of our way do we go to, like, do virtue, right? I mean, it's like, I'm making a lot of money, everybody loves me, I got vacation time. I mean, it takes some kind of real... Well, yeah.
I mean, when you're a human, when you perceive yourself as a human, like, you can still experience.
Absolutely.
I would say that it's generally true, but you can see also habits differently from person to person. Some people, when they have a lot of money, you can, like Bill Gates or friends like, I don't know, and you can take Richard Gere, they actually use it all to help other beings. And I don't know when they are alone. Some people, there are people who, when they are alone, they really swear everybody and don't to give something to anybody. When they're successful, they are kind of giving and generous.
Absolutely.
And there is the opposite as well. So it's also a habit.
Yeah. And so, this is, again, it's a question of imprints, impulses, habituation, right? And it also ties in with, Chris, what you were saying, which is, it takes money to make money, or you got to have opportunity to collect the karma. Being a human is extremely expensive karma. I mean, to get back to what we were saying last week, at the end of last week, Bruce, it's like language having meaning, right? I mean, think of everything as a blank canvas, right? All of existence is a blank canvas. The fact that we have words and sounds that have meaning, that convey something about how to live and how to behave to produce a happier outcome, all of that is just shapes and colors and sound arising from a blank canvas that somehow can turn into something better and better and better, right? I mean, that's pretty far out.
That's profound.
And so, to be in a class like this, to be a human, not just to be a human, but to be in a class like this, where you can hear the sounds and have a meaning that cause a thought and a behavior which result in better spiritual outcomes, more happiness, right? Spiritual, higher evolution, incredibly rare. So those are very unusual karmic seeds. Those are very unusual energetic impulses. that bring that result, right? And as we use the ones we have, they're done. And if we're not creating more than we're using, then we're not spiraling upward, we're spiraling downward, karmically, right? I mean, we're either doing what you said, Chris, which is we're here in this class, listening to these things, and it gives us an opportunity to then boost ourselves up. Being here in this class, hearing these things, is also the consumption of past virtue. And so these scales, it's just these scales, you know, are we producing more virtue than we're consuming as a result of our existence? Period. That's it. Always. You know, usually we're consuming a lot more virtue than we're producing. Exactly. And so that's why Jason Kopp in the text was so strident about saying, you know, go for it now. You know, this is your only opportunity, right? You need to do it. You need to make use of this life. You need to make use of this time. You need to jump on it and you know, engage in your spiritual disciplines and practices now. You know, now is the time. It's not later. Right? Yeah.
But what you're describing is what a physicist might call an entropic system.
Where to translate that?
In physics, entropy is the property of any form of organization to seek ever lower energy levels and to approach chaos, approach disorganization. The theory being that it takes energy to achieve and to maintain any form of organization, and that as any system or individual expends energy, that it loses organization and descends into chaos. And that eventually, at least from some point of view, the universe will be a chaotic mass of inert matter, all energy having been expended. But that flies in the face, okay, of the obvious.
Yeah, that's not quite what I'm saying. What I'm saying.
Second law of thermodynamics.
Let's not do physics, please. Let's not do physics. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, you know, you essentially have the scales of justice or the scales of karma or whatever you want to call it. Are the negative impulses dominating the positive impulses, or vice versa, right? You know, there is a chain of events. There is a chain of perception, action, thought, word, deed, which is our lives, right? And in the stream of that, you know, as that fluctuates millisecond to millisecond, what are we producing, right? It's not that there's a natural tendency towards negativity and chaos and disorder, implicitly, right? It's simply that our habituation is to negativity. It's simply that we have a massive habituation to behave like negative asses, you know, rather than virtuous holy beings, right? If our habituation is already to be virtuous holy beings, great. It isn't.
But isn't the fact that we're here evidence that we did have some sort of impetus pushing us upward? So, like, couldn't you make an equal argument that we're on an upward spiral?
So yeah, and so, you know, we have to be objective and give the whole picture, right? Which is that we're incredibly fortunate to be here right now in this room, hearing sounds that translate to meaning, which translates to higher spiritual evolutionary impulse, or whatever you want to call it, right? So yeah, we're incredibly fortunate. And once that's done, it's done. And we're left with what's left. Right? So both are true. We're incredibly fortunate, and once that stuff is used up, we're left with whatever's left in them, you know, that's going to ripen.
Plus the residual, you said.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is the essence of our spiritual path, right? Is because of all this, we can either just not pay attention and be schmucks and jerks and treat people around us badly, you know, and hurt them without thinking or caring, right? In which case, we're collecting certain energetic impulses, karmic seeds, which will ripen into a lousier life perception for ourselves and lousier realm perception for ourselves in the future. Or we can develop virtuous ethical, pure, holy, spiritual habituation and impulses, right? In which case, life will get better and better, and we'll become holier and holier, and ultimately, have those perceptions as our ongoing valid reality, right? So we have to put the right thing into our mind stream, into us, right? We have to collect the right energetic latencies, if you will. I mean, think about it for a minute. I mean, I'm just really way off topic, but what the hell, that's good stuff. I mean, think about it for a minute. How do you feel when you've done something good? What is the afterglow of having done something good?
Frequently, it depends on the outcome.
Well, I'm saying if the outcome was good, like you help someone, they're happy, you're happy, it feels good, right?
I mean, you can do something good, but there can be bad outcomes.
Oh, absolutely.
Isn't there the classic cases where you buy the slip mat for someone in the bathtub, you put it in there, and they still slip and break their leg?
But I'm just trying to keep it simple, just to keep it simple. So let's just talk about pure goodness. If you engage in pure goodness through and through, the residual afterglow is pretty nice, right? Yeah, it's pretty self-evident, right? If you do something really shitty and you know it, then that doesn't feel so nice afterwards, right?
Well, most religions have that same principle, right?
But that's really what we're talking about here from the perspective of karmic seeds. Right? I mean, that's really what we're talking about.
But why don't we view that as just another form of habituation?
Which
Yeah, that's a great question.
The fact that we feel good after performing what is nominally a good deed, or that we feel bad after performing what is nominally a bad deed.
Yeah.
Why don't we
That
just
is
say
the habituation.
I'm sorry.
That is the perception of the action. So
Is it innate or is it learned? Because what I think John is suggesting here is that there's some sort of natural buoyancy to the feeling that arises from having performed a good act, whereas there is some natural decadence arising from the performance of a negative act, as opposed to them simply being arbitrarily learned and associated.
I mean, there is the term Jewish guilt.
Well, I think he was saying it as if you label your action from your perception as good, then you will label the feelings that you feel after as good.
And what I was simply trying to say was I was simply trying to make more clearly manifest the idea of residual energies, i.e. karmic seeds, right? So I was simply trying to say, look, we can almost tune into the fact that there's some good energy left at the end of a goodness. And we can almost tune into the fact that there's some bad energy left at the end of negative behavior.
Which would mean it is not a learned, the feeling of goodness is not a learned behavior. It is an artifact of the residual energy that survives the good act.
But isn't that what the negative energy?
If you will, there's residual energy that survives a good act, residual energy that survives a bad one, and the residuum produces a positive feeling or a negative feeling commensurately.
Yeah.
So that it isn't. So from that perspective, we cannot say that I simply learned a habit.
Oh, I wouldn't call it a habit. No.
It's an inescapable product of a certain kind of behavior,
Which we call karma.
Not unless you might not have the karma to see that, though.
Well, but this is the point. The point of karma is that laws of karma are what's the word? Are clearly defined in that good like produces like, right? A positive deed produces a positive karmic seed, i.e. a positive residual energy, which is part of your mind stream, which you carry with you, which ripens into the perceptual result of seeing yourself having some good experience.
So there's this wonderful movie which was up for Best Picture this year called Whiplash, which is probably the least known of the Best Picture nominees. And this is actor J.K. Simmons, who plays a music teacher in a conservatory, jazz of all things. And he is the prototypical martinet. He's a dictator, he abuses his students, he works them to the bone, he tricks them, he deceives them. He's the nastiest bastard. Okay, and he plays it beautifully, won a Best Supporting Actor. And at some point, this villain sits down at a table with one of his student victims and discusses why he did what he did. And he begins by saying, the two most damaging words in the English language are good job. Anybody who hears good job means that they stop trying at that point. They're satisfied with what they've done. But if you push and grind and you never tell anybody, they did a good job, then eventually you'll turn into Charles Bird. You'll turn into the greatest jazz musician that ever lived. Nobody ever told him he did a good job. And greatness was the result, okay, of not having that kind of positive moment, positive experience. And, you know, it's hard to argue with when you read the biographies of people who are the highest achievers, and they are so driven by what, and usually been driven by some demon of their own or a demon in their surroundings, and there was nothing positive about it. And greatness seemed to arise from quite the opposite set of seeds.
That's just a perspective. You don't really know the story.
It's a movie, Bruce!
Right. Perspective.
Oh, it's just a movie.
It is just a movie. You aren't really there. You're getting a slice of a representation of a situation that may not accurately represent what really happened.
Right,
That
thank you,
it might
thank you.
work some of the time, but is it going to work all the time?
But then that would negate the point that there was a natural quality arising, a good feeling arising from what we'll designate as a good action. Here, he's saying that good job, okay, the positive reinforcement, led to mediocrity.
But that's the underlying variable of complacency,
So you're-
which I think the teacher's talking
That's
about.
his point.
You're postulating a new philosophy here, a new theory, as far as I can tell.
And
I think we should have a break at that point.
I would just want to tell to Bruce that I just came about a very famous book which is about how between the 80s, between the early 80s to the 90s, the Russian won all the medals. I don't know, in 88 I think, the Russian won like 84 medals and the American won 6 medals. So the reason for that was that they developed a very special training system, and they wrote a book about it. There's a book published actually in English about it like a few years ago, which is very interesting from a psychological standpoint, and like how to create excellence. Without telling you what is in the book, which I recommend, I will give you a detail if you want later. I would just say that it's always kind of the balance between good feedback and bad feedback. That it's like
Right,
it's
so-
always somewhere the carrot and
There
the
you go.
honey, you know.
So his performance theory trumps your performance theory. There you go. Have a break.
I'm just saying, I mean, it's much more than